Lumos. Welcome to class, everyone. Today we're going to talk about chapters 32 to 34 really quickly. Some really important things. Hopefully you've read them all already. But I'm going to point out a few things. Number one, there are multiple times in the beginning of chapter 32 where Huck starts using the N-word again. And I don't know if you noticed this, but I feel like he was using it less and less. Now that he's separated from Jim, now that he's talking about other people other than Jim who happen to be African American, he's suddenly using that word again. An example of this is on the page of top of 221. Tom's Aunt Sally is asking him about the supposed explosion that Huck was a part of, and she asked, "Good gracious, anybody hurt?" And he says, "No, ma'am, killed a nigger." Obviously, that makes me sad because anybody hurt and someone died doesn't really make sense to me. But also, like, he's falling back into, now he's like surrounded by white people. Now that Jim is in front of him, he's falling back into like, nobody was hurt, just a slave was killed. Those are different things for him. And I think that one of the things we can learn from this is that change has to be intentional, right? I think that we've seen Huck changing a lot and growing a lot when Jim is there in front of him and like when he's taking care of Jim, and yet he clearly is not all the way like shaking all of these things that he has grown up learning. So I think that Twain's trying to point out like how intentional we have to be when we are trying to be the best versions of ourselves. So we go on and we figure out who Huck is pretending to be, which is Tom Sawyer, which is a crazy chance, just FYI. But Huck is thrilled because now, like, this is an easy lie because he knows a lot about Tom Sawyer. That's all I'm going to say about chapter 32. Plot-wise, it's important, so I hope that you read it well. But we'll jump into 33 and 34 because there's a lot in those. Huck meets Tom. On the top of page 225, Tom is asking Huck lots of questions, and he says he wanted to know all about it right off because it was a grand adventure and mysterious, and so it hit him where he lived. I think it's important to remember this about Tom. He is all about adventure and being mysterious, and that is going to be important in the following chapters. Huck goes on to be honest and say, "Tom, one of the reasons why I'm still here is I want to steal Jim away." And farther down on page 225, he being Tom, he stopped and went studying. I says, "I know what you'll say. You'll say it's dirty, low-down business, but what if it is? I'm low-down." So again, like, grumpy at himself, doesn't believe in himself, doesn't believe how good he is. "And I'm going to steal him, and I want you to keep Mom and not let on. Will you?" His eyes lit up, and he says, "I'll help you steal him," which feels like a good thing, and I think it's kind of awesome. But I also want us to pay attention to why both of these boys are trying to free Jim, right? For Huck, it's because he thinks it's the wrong thing to do, even though it's the right thing to do. He loves Jim. Why is Tom helping, though? I think that's going to be an important contrast over the next couple chapters. Again, on the bottom of 226, we get more things about Tom. He warned a boy to meekly along up the yard like a sheep. No, he came in important like a ram. So everything that Tom does is dramatic, is a little bit extra, is a little bit obnoxious. So keep watching. Again, that's going to be important over the next couple chapters. On the bottom of 229, we have another mention of religion. Uncle Silas, he asked a pretty long blessing over it, but it was worth it. Yada, yada, yada. Which again is Twain trying to be funny, right? To say like, it was worth it to listen to this beautifully long prayer because the food was so good. I don't know, even as Huck is changing and growing, we keep seeing him like missing it. Sometimes it's funny. It's supposed to be funny. I do want to point out what happens at the end of this chapter, which I think is really important. If you read it, you know that Jim let on to Uncle Silas, who told a bunch of the townspeople about the king and the duke who were trying to do their like royal nunsuch, their like naked dancing around show again in this town. And so the people came prepared, and so they weren't fooled. And rather than just like running them out of town or like throwing them in jail, they tarred and feathered the king and the duke, which is awful. But there's a piece of me, right, because these are just characters in the book, and I'm like, oh, they deserved it. They were terrible people. I'm so mad at them the whole time. But I think that Huck's response is beautiful. He says this about these people who made his life miserable, about like who manipulated, who lied, who like made his life so hard, stole all of his things, took advantage of him. Like, he knows that they're bad people. He said, it made me sick to see it. At the bottom of 230, sorry. It made me sick to see it, and I was sorry for them, poor, pitiful rascals. It seemed like I couldn't ever feel any hardness against them anymore in the world. It was a dreadful thing to see. Human beings can be awful cruel to one another. So again, we see Huck's, like, innocence pointing out something wise, right? There's a piece of me that thinks it's good that the king and the duke got punished, and yet Huck is so good deep down that he says human beings can be awful cruel to one another, right? No human deserves to be tarred and feathered no matter how bad they have been. Huck, I think, is a really good person, and we are seeing that more and more and more and more. And then that's kind of the end of that chapter. Huck still doesn't, like, believe in himself. He still doesn't think he has a conscience, and yet, like, he has moments of deep goodness that, like, that I miss, you know? I think he's a better person than I am deep down. Chapter 34 is an important one because, again, we go back to that contrast of why is Huck trying to free Jim and why is Tom trying to free Jim, which is going to be important to watch. At the top of page 232, Huck and Tom are talking about, like, how they realized where Jim was being kept because of, like, the whole watermelon thing. They saw somebody putting watermelon in there. You wouldn't feed watermelon to a dog. So Tom says, it shows a body can see and don't see at the same time, which I feel like that line is kind of like a metaphor for everything in this book, right? And also life. We can sometimes see, but not really see what's happening at the same time, which I think goes to, like, Southern hospitality, to, like, people having slaves, to the way that people treat one another, to, like, things that are true in our world right now. Like, it is easy to see and yet not see at the same time. So although that line might not feel important, I think that it is. Continuing on, Huck has a plan to free Jim quickly, and Tom says no to it. And why does he say no to it? Because it is, as he says, mild as goose milk. Or as Huck says on the top of page 233, Tom's plan is worth 15 of mine for style. So why is Huck trying to free Tom or Jim? Because he loves him. And why is Tom trying to free Jim? For style, for adventure, for all those things that we, like, are reminded about Huck in these first few chapters. He likes to do things for the drama. Weird, right? Like, that's not why you free someone. So again, we see this contrast between Huck and his supposed hero, Tom. Even on page 234, Tom says, I should hope we could find a way that's a little more complicated than that, Huck Finn, right? He doesn't want to take the simple way. He doesn't just want to get Jim out. He wants to, like, do it for the attention, for the style, for the glory. It's not why you save someone from slavery, but it is for Tom, and Huck doesn't quite seem to get that yet. And then Tom goes on and he says, that's more like, it's real mysterious and troublesome and good, he says, but I bet we can find a way that's twice as long. There ain't no hurry. Let's keep on looking around. There kind of is a hurry because this is a human being, right? This is his life, and yet, so again, we see Tom saying, like, nah, there's no hurry, like, I don't really understand this is a person, and Huck believes him, right? Because this is someone that Huck has, like, trusted and looked up to his whole life, and Huck doesn't yet realize, like, Tom's wrong. It's a hard thing, right? When someone that we hold in high esteem is wrong, it's a hard thing to realize, and I think that Mark Twain is trying to say something in there. And so they go on, they continue with their plan. There are a lot of plot points that go in on there. There's more lying, there's more good stuff. So keep reading that. Those are some of the things I wanted to point out. I hope that you picked up on some of them. I hope that you keep thinking about some of them. The next few chapters, the contrast between Huck and Tom is going to be really important. So keep watching that. And now that we're at the end, Knox.